Hello and welcome back, cellists, to our third lesson on the slow movement of Rachmaninoff's Cello Sonata. And we're also looking at Feuillard study number 47 this week as well. Now, as ever, we'll begin with some technical warm-ups, and I always like to try and make them sort of relate to what we're actually going to be looking at in the material today. So today I'm basing my technicals on the kind of division of the beat that Rachmaninoff uses in the Andante movement. So the movement is written in 4/4 time, and as you'll know, looking at the score, a lot of the time those beats are divided into triplets. So you effectively end up with a compound quadruple time, as if it were in 12/8, that is to say. So basically that's just 4 beats in the bar, and each of them can be divided into 3. And as we know, there's a wonderful sort of contradictions of moving backwards and forwards between a division of 2, 4 and 3 in the whole work. So this idea of 12 beats in a bar can directly leap you to thinking perhaps about something else which has 12 notes, and that is the chromatic scale. So that would be an ideal vehicle for us to imagine a division of 12, and we're going to put all those 12 notes in the bow. But rather than just a smooth legato or a separate bow solution, let's do something different. So I'd like to look at the kind of stroke that we might be employing at this next location in the sonata. And here we're looking at bars sort of 41, 42 onwards. So just taking actually the middle 2 octaves of a chromatic scale. So this is starting from the C, an octave below middle C, to the octave above. So we're looking at this sort of part of the tessitura of the instrument that is actually very much in line with the area in which we've been working. And here's the solution that I'm looking for. So that the stroke is very, very gentle, very light, but you can hear a slight articulation, ha 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 ha. But it's very, very gentle. It's not. That's a lot more. There's a lot more clarity to the front end of those notes like that. It's almost becoming quasi-marcato, with a little bit of an afterthought in terms of the sound continuing on almost to the next note. What we're really looking for is a continual movement, and it's just a tiny bit of pressure whilst you don't disturb the speed of the bow. So all the time the hair is contacting the string, which it can of course do in other more articulated bow strokes, but we're trying to keep pretty much a constant speed and just using the first finger in particular on the down bow and the little finger on the up. So that's where the strength will be coming from in terms of creating those tiny depressions of pressure as you move up the scale. So that would be very useful for the kind of quality of sound and the flow that we'll be looking at in this sonata. My other technical to prepare is actually going to return to the key of the sonata. We're going to look at G minor. The movement itself that we're looking at is an E flat major, but as we know, there is points at which there is a nod, an actual move to G minor, and also nods in the direction of, which we will discuss a bit later, and about what that relevance is. So let's just try something slightly different. So rather than G major beginning in your standard, beginning in open strings and going first to fourth and continuing, do something else. Let's start instead. All stopped notes, and we're starting on the C string. Nice high arm here so that you get the weight over the fingertips for good resonance. And of course, this location was exactly where we stopped yesterday's Rachmaninoff, which is at bar 40. So we're using that B flat there. And so, it's quite directly relevant to the areas of the instrument that we have been working on and will be working on. So the finger solution would be like any other stopped note minor scale. So we have this. See how very easy it was to almost fall into a habit of an open string there. Long way to go. So there's, one aspect of, we're not familiar with that because we have other solutions we normally apply. But let's actually think not so much about the finger solution there. We've got that as one new addition, new method of thinking. But let's actually think about the bow stroke. And I think, take your time with this, and it's going to be sort of related to the chromatic, where we've got that slight breathy quality per note, on the degree of the scale. And this time we're going to use the configuration that Rachmaninoff uses in 42-ish onwards. In those configurations we have a slur, and then we repeat the second note on that extra part of the bow. Now that's a better example because actually I don't intend to lead the string. Keep the hair on the string, and same on the up bow, driving with the little finger of the right hand. And there's also purposefully a slight lean at the beginning of the slurred pair. And that is really what's indicated in the writing of the Rachmaninoff, where he writes a slur over 3 notes with a line on the first. And quite a lot of the time, the second and third notes are the same pitch, but there's absolutely no intention, of course, whatsoever for it to be any kind of tie. It's just got to be this smooth flow of ya-da-da, 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 whether you change pitch or not. So sometimes there is a change of pitch. Let's have a look. So the first one we've got a change of pitch, and the second we don't. We can have the same pitch. So we'll be coming to that a bit later, but this scale, the change of where you play is very rich and gives you a sense of the kind of area that we're working on with the left hand, and the bow configuration gets you well prepared for really considering how you're solving that before you put it in place in the music. Okay, right, so let's now turn our attentions to Feuillard number 47. And yesterday we had arrived at bar 9, and we have just arrived in F sharp major. And as my discussions have been based on harmony, I'm going to remind you that the idea of this is, even though we are linear, we need a linear instrument most of the time. Linear lines predict and shape harmonies. You can hear them, you can see them a great deal of the time. Not always so clear, as we know from some of the areas of the Rachmaninoff, which chord you really are in, where we thought we were on one chord and it turns out we're not. So in the Feuillard here, we've arrived at F sharp major, and it's very clear in the writing. You can hear it with the lovely big major sounds of these 2 whole sets of whole tones there, and crossing the string. So that on the way down there, we had an implied C sharp major with a 7th, arriving at F sharp major. Now, to all intents and purposes, it sounds to you like I've arrived back at F sharp, and surely, yeah, we're in F sharp major, and sounds like it, doesn't it? No. it's actually now in G flat major. So it's an enharmonic change. So it's slightly disturbing when you're first reading that, or it might be, because you've moved from C sharp, D sharp, E sharp to G flat, which to all intents and purposes is like an F sharp. I say that with caution because it's not really quite the same, and we can of course make differences on a non-fretted instrument, but enharmonically, let's say they are all equivalent. So we've arrived at G flat major, and that will sound rather like the F sharp major you had at the start of this. Now this is a lovely moment that happens between this bar and the next, because there's only one note change to this arpeggio. The G flat goes down a semitone, and we've immediately arrived at B flat minor arpeggio. Now this is a beautiful coincidence that in this study we have that enharmonic, or that harmonic shift from G flat major to B flat minor by just changing one note down by a semitone. And we've mentioned before about pivots and the use of semitone adjustment to move from one triad to another, and that this is exactly the relationship that we have in Rachmaninoff, because E flat major, if we change that E flat down one semitone, we arrive at G minor. And so you can see it's really easy physically and by sound. It's really easy for us to move from E flat major to G minor, or in the case of this study, G flat major to B flat minor. Last comment on that. How are they related in terms of the circle of fifths? Well, that relationship is in actual fact that the G minor is the relative minor of the dominant of E flat major. And similarly in this Feuillard study, that's the same relationship. B flat minor is the relative minor of D flat major, which is the dominant of G flat major. So it might be a lot to get your head around. The most important thing to take away from this is that in your arpeggio shape, it's just wonderful that you could just move one note by a semitone, and you've absolutely transformed yourself, and you've moved quite a distance, you know, in terms of harmonic progression. And the end of that little fragment that we're looking at, it will just end up coming back up to the F, ready for the final leg of this study. And one other little technical thing on the way there we had. So we are swapping a 1-3, we're doing a substitution shift from 1 to 2 and back across the string. And the relevance to Rachmaninoff here is that all those 6 notes are in a slur, including the 2 B flats in the middle of it. So we have so a little bit like it that we're looking at in Rachmaninoff, repetition of note whilst the bow is apparently slurring, but it's not really. We've got to have a small rearticulation by pressure control. So let's just see what this whole fragment has got so far for us. To glide quite easily from one thing to another without necessarily having much understanding, but it's nice to try and get a little more than you might have had before. Right, let's now turn our attentions to the sonata. So yesterday we arrived at this amazing climactic moment, but finally, yes, we are here absolutely at E flat major. And it's fortissimo with an accent. Really wonderful sort of solid low note, the lowest note we have played and shall play in the whole of this movement, right down the bottom end of our instrument, wonderful and solid. And out of that we're going to come to something completely different. It's like coming down from something really firm in the earth to coming up to being vapour clouds very high up in the atmosphere, so that from this low note very fine is going to be just sort of suddenly appearing on the horizon, just about. That might have been maybe not quite the tone quality as after, but it gives you an idea. Something very firm to something very, very fine and gentle. Now let's really consider what's happening here. So we've got this little chromatic line. And this, you can hear it moving around G. Sort of really we hear it as embellishing the major third of E flat major. There's a trick, isn't there? Yeah. This is an amazing piece of writing. So there's this wonderful drama to it, that in the piano part there's a massive range. It's going down from an incredibly low, the bottom E flat on the piano, and a superb range of both hands there. You're getting to actually pretty much, I think, the top B flat of the piano. But it's an open chord. What do I mean by that? I mean that actually the piano is full of E flats and B flats. All E flats and B flats. And there is no third in the piano part. Well, until, it does make a little guest appearance at the end of bar 42. But for a bar and a half, it's just an open chord. Fantastic, huge resonance, big wide tessitura on the piano there. And therefore, this little chromatic play is actually playing on, is it major or is it minor? I mean, sure, the A flat hasn't a bearing on that tonality aspect other than it's like a suspension, like a full 3 suspension, but the G would indicate that we're E flat major. But if it's G sharp, then it would be E flat minor. And as we discussed at the very first lesson, at the opening, the harmony is straight first in that very first bar, moves from the major to sounding like E flat minor, but the use of F sharp rather than G flat, which is the leading note to the key of our piece. So this whole little question mark, and maybe sort of deliberately being misleading, is coming into play in this beautiful fragment where you have this grandeur and enormity in the piano and this fragility in the cello, which is just hovering around, are we major or are we minor? Now, from the point of view of division of beat, most of this passage, well, for the cellist, we are triplets, and each bar has got 12 notes, like I was sort of pointing to at the beginning of the class today. It's like a compound time, effectively. And initially, that is supported in the piano part with triplets, but as we've seen previously, what happens in the second half of the second bar of this phrase is you get the left hand playing semiquavers, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, which again gives you the sense of something is pushing forwards and pushing on, a little inclination that all is not so settled. And when those semiquavers come in, the piano part then actually plays a G, so it's actually confirming we're trying to stick to E flat major. Then we get a very sort of similar pair of bars that follow on with the same idea, that the semiquavers come in the second half of 44 and again illustrate the tonality of major again. Watch out for the articulation, because we will be at the end of the bow. Allow yourself to, you'll have got quite a long way through the bow, so we're going to be at the upper part of the bow for the beginning of this. Now the last triplet there, ya-da-da, there is no mark on that E flat, so it's like you sink into it smoothly. Same thing again at the last beat of bar 44, last beat of bar 42. It's smooth, it's not pa-da-da, but ya-da-da, as if you're absolutely agreeing with the sort of sitting on the tonic chord at that point. Be wary of timing when we have the first of these. And you'll need to wait. We've got a little tiny triplet quaver rest, so you've got to go all the way through to that point. And in that little sort of gap, let me just check. There should be, I can't see it on my score there. Yeah, the piano is playing actually in that space and in that moment. So be sure that you interlock and you hear it. Moving on, actually the one that's, I know this is really important to listen to, is at bar 45, where we have the similar idea. And there's a very low note sits straight away at the beginning of 45 in the piano part. And at this point onwards, the piano left hand now is going to be semiquavers the whole time. And there's that sense of agitation. So it's now going to be perpetually arpeggio figures going up and down in semiquavers whilst you continue with your triplets. Therefore, they're going to become, they'll feel more like there is a resistance there. So we have here a crescendo. I mean, actually we should really start a bit quiet in that. So we've been pianissimo, still remain fairly quiet. And in those last three quavers here, each of those three actually have a little line on them. So within here, I think you can kind of hear anyway the sense of, if you like, appoggiaturas. You know, there's something where we are leaning and resolving. That's a beautiful moment. D flat to C flat. Now, harmony here is extraordinarily rich. At the very top, when we've gone up to that E flat and resolved to the D, it's a G minor harmony under here. So you're actually a little tiny suspension, 6/5 suspension at the top there. At this point, D flat to C flat, oh my word, it could make you weep. It's A flat minor harmony with an added sixth, and you are a 4/3 suspension. I mean, you'll know by the feeling in the sound that this is special, without giving it any labels. And there's another one, and this time we are sitting over an E flat chord, and that is like a 6/5 suspension. You know, and it gives it this wonderful yearning quality. So at this point onwards, it's starting to feel a little bit more comfortable harmonically. It's sort of sitting a little bit around F minor at the moment with added seventh, and that these is a 9/8 suspension. Next bar, 9/8 on an E flat. And there I think we are, a 4/3 suspension over B flat being the dominant. So we're absolutely going on the home ground. But we've been through an incredible, rich harmonic adventure, which don't worry too much if those labels don't really register with you and your own musical understanding in terms of analysis. What you will know as active musicians is use your ears, and you know there's something really stunning and beautiful about those harmonies. And we need therefore, of course, to enrich it with technical methods. So we would have, we can use a bit of bow speed, more vibrato, faster vibrato. This there's a little tiny crescendo in there, push through, a little bit more pressure at this point. fact that we could slightly stretch some of those triplets, the ones that are wanting to resolve, yada, just a tiny bit of stretching time, to add something more, as if you're just reluctant to resolve the chord, if you like. And really that is all we're going to be looking at today before we come to the recap. So let's just have a review of the whole thing. We've had the loud resolution yesterday. And there's in that last moment there is, it's not written in the score, but there is often a slight pulling up. It feels like it just wants to, just for a moment, just catch your breath before we come back with the very resolute recap of the opening theme, but somewhat more embellished in the accompaniment. Once again, I hope this gives you some food for thought, and that you find your own explorations take you to a good journey, a good place in your understanding and feeling and expression of this rather special piece of music. See you tomorrow.